Hi, everyone. Welcome to the 2023 News Philanthropy Summit. I am Allie Vanier, Program Manager with the Lenfest Institute for Journalism, and I have just a few housekeeping items before we jump into this great conversation. Our event principles can be found on the main page of Zoom events, and I'll also post them in the chat in just a moment. This session is being recorded and will be shared out publicly after the summit. I see that closed captioning is already on. If you're unable to see that and you'd like to, just click the closed caption button at the bottom of your screen to turn that functionality on. And if you're having any technical difficulties during the session, just privately message me and I'll help you take care of that. Last but not least, we're going to use the Q&A function for audience questions. So rather than using the chat for questions, click the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen and we'll be able to ask those live of our fabulous speakers. Okay, that's my spiel. With all of that said, I am happy to introduce this session, The Return of the Baltimore Beat, a conversation between Lisa Snowden-McCray, Editor-in-Chief of the Baltimore Beat, Adam Holofcener of the Holofcener Foundation, moderated by Mario Lugay of Justice Funders. So I'm going to hand it over to Mario.
Wonderful, thank you. And first, my gratitude to Lenfest and specifically to Haley and Ali and Yossi and Annie. I'm forever grateful to each of you for seeing me in the way you have, including bringing me into and trusting me with this story. And of course, thank you to Lisa and Adam. I hope I'm able to honor both of you today in this role. Since that one time that Yossi brought the three of us together, your story, Lisa and Adam, and the story of the Baltimore Beat and the Lillian Holofcener Charitable Foundation has been widely told and written about. First featured in the Chronicle of Philanthropy, then much more broadly in news and magazine publications after the AP picked up the story. One headline read, "A family funds response to racial reckoning. Give all its assets to one Black-focused nonprofit." Another, "Foundation empties coffers to fund Black paper in Baltimore." And another, "Foundation chooses to go out of business to fund Black paper in Baltimore." In prepping for this conversation over the weekend and with the beautiful, spirit-filled, and creative life of Tyree Nichols in the forefront of my mind, I came back to the work of the artist Alexander Bell, whose art, and specifically whose counter-narrative series, as a New Yorker wrote, interrogates the shaping and spreading of information and the ways in which narratives and reportage advance the agendas of the powerful. She uses redaction, omission, annotation, and text editing to alter articles primarily from the New York Times. She then prints out enlarged versions of her deconstructions and plasters them onto walls around the city. It led me to reflect on the headlines written about this story today and to imagine how it might be told differently if it fell under a different headline, one that perhaps more closely read, "Black-led and community-driven paper allows family to free itself from philanthropy." I'd like to begin by inviting Lisa in to tell us about the Baltimore Beat, to take us back in time, about your founding imagination, perhaps your freedom dream. What would the paper be for its readers who are both part of Baltimore's Black community, and what would it be for readers beyond Baltimore's Black community?
Thank you so much. It's an honor to be here today and to talk about the Beat. The Beat has already lived a few lives. It was born out of the death of Baltimore City paper, which was a 40-year-old alt weekly here in Baltimore City. It was the brainchild of myself, my editor at City Paper at the time, Brandon Soderberg, and a publisher who at first was trying to buy City Paper itself from its owners at the Baltimore Sun. They did not allow it to be bought. So they just said, we've sit together, we'll start something else. And I was named the editor-in-chief. That ran just as a traditional, for-profit paper for about 5 months. And our publisher said, we just can't do this anymore. It's not financially feasible. So they pulled out pretty abruptly. But Brandon and I still knew that we wanted to start the work that we started at City Paper. And that work is really work that we began after the death of Freddie Gray and the uprising that came after it. Because before I even got there, Brandon and some of his other white coworkers were thinking, like, we're covering this racial reckoning that comes after this young man died after his interaction with Baltimore police. But we don't look like the city ourselves. Like, we're telling these stories and we need to do more ourselves. So we were really on this path. They hired me there. And we were on this path to really think about what a more just version of journalism could look like. So that ended with City Paper, and then we took that up at Baltimore Beat. We were not ready to let that work go again. And at that time, people were telling us about reporters all over the country that found themselves without newsrooms in the same way that we did. And the option that they were going for was nonprofit media. So we took about a year or so and learned as much as we could about nonprofit media, made friends and allies, and then we relaunched the Beat as a nonprofit about a year later. We ran in a much more limited capacity. We did not have the money that our publishers did, so we did as much as we could when we could. In that interim, Brandon also wrote a book, so that took some time away. So we did not publish in the way that we did at all in like full capacity. We kind of bumped along in that way for a couple of years. And then I was working at a whole nother nonprofit here in Baltimore. And Brandon called me and said, I've got something to tell you. And it sounds crazy, but like it's real. And that was that Adam was going to give us $1 million. It didn't end there. It wasn't like this nice tied up bow. It took us a while for like all of us to sit down and kind of talk at the table to be like, what does this look like? What does a $1 million gift look like? What does a no strings attached $1 million gift look like? We planned for a while, and then we were able to relaunch the Beat this past August with a small staff and giving out a free paper twice a month.
That's awesome. And I was struck by the words of you sharing that the Baltimore Beat was in some ways an act of you not letting go of what you had started. And I'd like to invite Adam into this story and to share your story, which is partly about letting go in some ways. So tell us about first your family's foundation, and perhaps its history and where it was in 2020 when some of these conversations began.
Well, Mara, thank you. Thanks to everybody at the Lenfest, and thank you to Lisa for going on this journey. Essentially, at the beginning of 2020, I was not formally associated with the Lillian Holofcener Charitable Foundation in any way. I have a small family. Our last name, Holofcener. If you Google it, there's only like 9 of us left. Anyone who else has that last name is related to me. And so Lillian was my great-grandmother, someone who had been based in Baltimore City her entire life. And I was somewhat estranged from her son, Michael Holofcener, who was my biological grandfather. And when he died about 15 years ago, the bulk of his assets, a couple $1 million, were put into this charitable foundation. And my uncle, Rick Holofcener, was the main executor and essentially operating officer of this nonprofit. And he's been a serial entrepreneur his whole life. He's based in Chiang Mai, Thailand. He didn't really have any connection to philanthropy or the nonprofit world. And so he had spent, majority of the first 15 years of this nonprofit, I think with the advice and counsel that he had been given, doing philanthropy stuff, right? Giving out your legally mandated 5% of your holdings each year, reinvesting the capital that the foundation held to try and obtain more gains in order to give out, small grants to different organizations that he had either had a connection with or other members of the family had some type of connection with. I'm the only member of my family that when I started my post-undergraduate journey, and even during my undergrad years, I was the member of the Holofcener group who was a non-profiteer and was a leftist and was politically engaged from an early age. And so when I started working for my first nonprofit organizations as a program person, I started to get an education as to the nonprofit industrial complex. And then 8 years ago, I moved back to Baltimore from Los Angeles and took over as executive director of a small legal services nonprofit here in Baltimore called Maryland Volunteer Lawyers for the Arts. And it was my first time as an executive in the nonprofit context. And so I then got a crash course education and development and fundraising and institutional philanthropy. I'm an attorney and a musician by training. And at that point, it became very clear to me, especially just in line with my other political ideologies, that foundations were not something that should exist. And so at that point, again, with no formal connection to the Lillian Holofcener Fund, I tried to reach out to my uncle a few different times to talk about ways that we could radically rethink our familial attachment to this foundation that he was in charge of. And I didn't get much positive feedback about that. And then at the beginning of 2020, after the beginning of the pandemic and the murder of George Floyd, there was enough kinetic sort of white guilt in my family that I thought would give me an opportunity to try and re-engage that conversation with not only my uncle who was running the foundation, but also other members of my family who had also not been engaged in that way. And it led to me conducting a programmatic and financial audit of the fund, and offering ways that we could again do something radically different, talking about divestiture, talking about giving over this money to community control. And one of the programmatic applications I suggested was giving money to the Baltimore Beat, which I had been connected to both as an attorney and as a friend, since its inception.
Powerful. When I first had the privilege to hear this story, it was when you, Lisa, were on a panel about fundraising. But I think what really drew me in was it fell less into the category of fundraising with replicable tactics and strategies. Like, people couldn't just walk away with, oh, let me find Adam, and hopefully he has other foundations. But one that started out between two individuals and a relationship that predated the one between the formal relationship that came into being between the Beat and the foundation. And so we talked both about the foundation and the Beat. Adam, I want to first invite you to continue a little bit more, to share a little bit more about your own journey. I think you shared it right now in a very kind of linear way, but we know that the process of realigning our own interests, our own values, towards giving something up is actually a much longer, difficult journey where you have to find within that journey its own rewards that might not be incentivized by other conditions in society. So would love to first allow you to talk a little bit more about what do you think made it possible to get to where you were in that decision, beyond the kind of content of learning and understanding, but maybe a little bit more about kind of like who you were, perhaps how you're raised, or just experience you had up until that point.
Sure. I mean, one of the things I can think about is, Mario, I love the way that you, in your opening remarks, talked about how, we serendipitously had this AP story that was picked up from the Chronicle of Philanthropy, and the titles that all the editors at hundreds of publications around the country and around the world had chosen in terms of framing the narrative of this. In my mind, is what fundamentally underlines how broken everything is, right? When the Beat launched, there were other stories that were written about it, really trying to limit the exposure of even the way that they got funded initially, right? Because the important thing here is the Beat and the work that they do. And then the AP story gets picked up because almost of a fetishization of some white folks, doing this thing of giving away all their money, which we can even talk about is not even it's funny the ways that it changes between we fully divested our fund, which is not 100% true, and we essentially, divested our fund, which is like 95% divested. And I only bring that up to say that I got to all of this because my feeling has been, since I was an adolescent, that that reframing that you did is the way that I look at the work I'm trying to do, right? And I don't know if it's because as an artist, it's all about reframing the world that you live in, and I don't know if it's because I, was fortunate enough to have proximity to folks who helped me to understand how you can reframe things. And I don't know if that's why I was drawn to be a public interest attorney, because it's always just reframing all of the crooked superstructure that we have around that you can turn on its head to try and give people a better day-to-day experience. But my experience even in a nonprofit, right, at a young age, being a program person working in New York City, putting arts education into the boroughs of New York, and just being very confused on how New York City didn't have arts programming in their public schools, as sort of a naive younger person, and then being a white person going into primarily Black or BIPOC schools, and then being the person, me and my 4 other colleagues who had an office in Midtown Manhattan, would then deliver arts and culture to these schools, and then they reluctantly invited us to the gala, which was at the Waldorf Hotel, and seeing 1,000+ people all in black ties, who were the ones funding me and my 4 other people to essentially bestow art and culture upon the youth of New York City's boroughs. And just, I already knew from an academic perspective how ridiculous that was, but the palpable nature of it, I think, just helped me to solidify that if I ever had proximity, if I was in any of their situations where I had access to capital, and that I wouldn't that I would flip the paradigm on its head. I couldn't participate. And I think that's why the way that I relate so much to the way that you reframed the freeing of, again, wealth that I don't believe my family should have had, especially if we had lived in an equitable, system beforehand, which we didn't, right? Is just what led me to feeling compelled to, putting myself in a position, both Machiavellian and otherwise, where I could try and affect some sort of capital divestiture when that opportunity arose. And I had to lay in wait for a while, I guess.
And Lisa, I invite you to share with us the trailer of your journey that you want to share with us. I want to say that I was in our prep call. It was so clear to me that the Baltimore Beat was not a product, but a vehicle for you. In just that 1 hour call, the number of names you mentioned related to the Beat that could be brought along was just really powerful. So interested in your journey and the ways in which kind of that sensibility of bringing things and people along kind of came about.
I guess if we're in this conversation and we're kind of talking about Adam's ancestors and like the way that he was able to take that money and give it to me, like the thing that I think about every day, like this is a lot of work. I'm never not working. Even if I'm resting, I'm working. But this is work that I was meant to do. I think about my grandfather. One of the stories that my dad always tells is like my grandfather had an eye for business, like he always did. My dad's in his 80s, but there's property that his dad bought that is still in my family's possession now. There was other property that he wanted to buy in Annapolis, Maryland, and was told you can't buy it because you're Black. And so I think about like all the people that were as good or better than me at this job, and they never got the opportunity to even try. And I just feel like that's what's kind of lost in these conversations, because I mean, it's a story that was written in one place and then had to be kind of flattened so that it could be digestible for a lot of other places that picked it up, is like, there's agency on my side, because like I said, my paper, I love it and it's very, very good. Also, like, I had to be ready for this moment as well. And like, I think that I'm creating a paper that, and Adam, I think you said this to me at our launch party, where it's like, this now changes kind of the game plan. Like, there are young people in Baltimore that see a paper that's made by somebody whose dad was a groundskeeper and whose mom was an elementary school teacher. We put out a paper, the issue that just came out is a man who just passed away. He was the Baltimore Sun's first Black photographer. Before him, his dad was the photographer for the Afro, which is a very old Black paper here in Baltimore. That's intentional to also to honor this man, but also have an opportunity again for people to pick up the paper and say, wow, like, this is a career option for me. This is something that is a possibility. It's not a pipe dream to think about making a living being an artist or being a journalist and telling the stories of the city. So I just wanted to kind of like use the time, I guess, to highlight that thing.
And if you'd like to talk more also about what struck me about part of your talk was about giving colleagues, putting them in positions of editorial roles.
Mm-hmm.
Can you say more about that?
I did not want to just hire writers. Like, I do want to hire writers, but I also wanted to hire editors, because it's very difficult to become an editor. Like, journalism is a very white industry. It's very hard to get in the door to just be a journalist. Then it's harder to make your way up the ladder. I quit my job at the Baltimore Sun to start the Beat. And I was told, well, we were going to groom you, but like, how long was that going to be? Nobody knows. So I got able to jump the line for waiting for whoever to decide. Like, I had the talents that I have now, then. And so it's just like, I was able to do the thing that I was supposed to do because the door was open for me. So our arts and culture editor, Terry Henderson, has agency. Like, she writes, but she can also find other younger writers and give them money to write also. And right now in Baltimore City, which is a city with pretty rich culture, there aren't too many arts and culture editors here. Our news editor, who's no longer with us, Brian Charles, again, like, a very sharp mind, a great journalist. I didn't want him to be a writer. I wanted him to help guide what this thing is. Like, it was important to help people skip the line and give them really the power that they deserved all along.
Beautiful. So now we've talked a little bit about the foundation, the Baltimore Beat, a little bit about your own journeys. Want to now focus in on the decision, the moment, but also the time it took to kind of go through, given the theme of transformation for Lenfest, the transformation of those assets from one that was held and controlled by a foundation, ending the entire foundation in essence, in order to relaunch the Beat, beginning something else. So yeah, I want to give you both the opportunity to talk about that process in of itself. And now I think you all have done a powerful job to get everyone to read the Alex Daniels piece and how he reported it, want to invite you two to kind of uplift the pieces of that story or that moment that you think are worth uplifting. And I'll let either of you start.
I'm going to start just because I'm going to throw it to you, because I want to say that even in that, it was very intentional. My partner in founding the Beat, Brandon Soderberg, is a white man. And so he and Adam kind of like, when kind of dealing with some of the concerns or dealing with some of the things that were a little bit harder conversations, like on purpose, were allies to me. So there were also things that like I didn't even know were happening. They were like, you know, trust us, we've got this. And they did. Like they were like, we're gonna cut you out of this because we don't want you to have to answer certain questions that we don't think that you have to answer, or make a means or that you shouldn't have to. But trust us that we're going to end up with this thing where you have full agency. Like, these are no strings attached. So I'm throwing it to Adam because I kind of have to, because I appreciate even like that thoughtfulness and navigating these kind of like power structures.
Yeah. So to be clear, like I said, in early 2020, I didn't have any connection to the foundation, right? So even when people are like, I didn't know that you had this connection to this money, I didn't even have, I had it, but not in a legal corporate sense, right? I didn't have the agency there to participate. And it was such a fractured moment. And I know I said this to Mario and Lisa, but I was really trying to follow the playbook of Naomi Klein's book, Shock Doctrine, and utilizing the shock, the myriad shocks to the system in the beginning of 2020 to say, generally, it's only like the fascists who, use shocks to change systems, and left is pretty bad at that. But this might be a way to create some systems change, right, from a philanthropic perspective during that. But what that took was I had to get members of my family together. And the only folks who even wanted to be involved were my uncle and my sister and my cousin. And I was like I'm already the black sheep of the family, right? Like the one who's, the lefty artist, person who's seen apart ideologically, right? The decisions I make, the risks I take, the things that I hold, the risks I'm willing to take. And so I had to sort of pretend in an objective fashion, okay, let's, just take a look at what's happening and see how we can do something that is really outside of the ken of the rest of you, right? Who don't even have a relationship to the nonprofit industrial complex or leftist politics or foundations, and try to convince you that not only what has been happening with the foundation since its inception was not the best thing that we could have been doing, but that we can actually do this thing that any other foundation generally, right? I know there's a couple folks out there who have tried to engage in spend downs and things like that, but like trying to really just empty the coffer in as transparent and aggressive a way as possible. And so, I had them read Decolonizing Wealth and the revolution will not be funded. And we kind of got to the end of the academic exercise and the end of my audit, and they all seemed really energized around the beat as an option for divestiture. And at that point is when I contacted Brandon, when I had sort of been tasked with exploring whether the beat would want to work with us on this. And at that point, I kind of thought we were in a good spot. I knew how sensitive it was, given that not only what Lisa's entire professional experience had been, but very specifically leaving the Baltimore Sun, starting the Baltimore Beat, and then having the first publisher drop out, right? And I'm dealing with my, again, like mildly with my family who had pretty much the same as most white folks, limitations in terms of how they understand racial politics, in terms of how they understand racial capitalism, in terms of how they understand their own views of themselves, their ego, their histories. And so I wanted to try and say, like, look, I'm a lawyer, right? So until the money is in Lisa's bank account, there's stuff that can go wrong. She's extremely vulnerable, and in as unpaternalistic a way as possible, I'm trying to shield that emotional labor, any possibilities of triggering or horrible traumatic experiences that could happen, but at the same time transparently say, here's what's going on. And so when Brandon and we made that connection, we then went through the process with my family, and I thought it was going to be a short process of like, we already agreed, Adam told us about divestiture, and the Beat is already this, homegrown institution that the community has really lifted up as something important to them. And, Lisa has been a journalism professional for, a few decades at this point, like no brainer. Then it took about a year of negotiating with my family about, well, wait a second, we want to really, see the business plan, and we really want to understand what it's going to look like, and can Lisa and Brandon really pull this thing off, and do we really want to defund entirely? And it was extremely difficult. I think one of the things that I learned a lot about was how important it was to create a really deliberate chain of empathy, so that, Lisa could empathize with Brandon, who could empathize with me, and I could empathize with my sister, and my sister could empathize with my uncle, and create a chain so that, I always have thought of myself as someone who can mediate in between, groups who are differently situated with one another in my legal practice, in my arts and culture practice. But there needed to be even further sort of chinks in that, or links in that chain, in order to make sure that we could get to a signed agreement. And I think that we were able to get to where we all wanted to be. But, all the members of my family came from it from different perspectives. And I think they still look at it in terms of how they got there, they were doing different things. My sister was supporting me, right? I was trying to reach toward ideals that would, potentially speak to my intergenerational culpability for being a part of, a white Jewish upper middle class family from Baltimore, right? We were trying to do different things. And I think we ostensibly had principles that we held in our head that we were trying to reach to, but our lived experiences, even as a family, make it difficult to empathize and engage with one another. So we really, it took a lot to just get to that space. And we were fortunate to have that money clear, which was big. But again, being fully honest about what's happened is the foundation is not, we had about $1 million left. And I think there were $1.1 million left in the fund, and $1 million of that was transferred to Lisa. $100,000 of it, my uncle negotiated for him to keep for undisclosed projects, which I still don't know what they are. That was just a bargaining thing that I didn't expect. That wasn't my impression of what was going to happen, but it sort of happened at the last minute. And I actually think it's a really, in certain like academic ways, I'm kind of glad it's there, because the idea of divestiture is still so hard, even theoretically, for people. It's tied to their ideas of legacy and ego and control and power, that if we really, this story would be like so ridiculous if it was like Adam said we should divest. Next day, we wrote a check, went to the Baltimore Beat, and that was it. And that wasn't it at all, right? It was far more complicated in a way that we're trying to also reproduce that model now, models of divestiture, models of familial empathy that can have more money go to the Beat, more money go to other papers, more money go to other community-based initiatives, that it would be absolutely disingenuous for us to say, I used my superior legal intellect to convince my family that, they should just do something radical, and then it just happened.
Yeah. There are big wins in life and small wins, and the imagination that the Baltimore Beat, in addition to all of its impact, was able to become the unifying thing that a family agreed upon, knowing how hard it is to get families to agree to anything. I think is also a win to be celebrated, because the things that I know families often finally agree upon tend to be things around like love or we got each other, right? But everything else is up for grabs and debate. And so it'd be interesting to talk one day about what, in fact, about the Baltimore Beat was able to draw and bring the whole family together to consensus, and all of that. I want to, and then I also just want to recognize the act of how the process happened, which could feel from the outset perhaps a little in terms of not kind of talking with Lisa directly about it. But I want to recognize it too as a condition of today's social movements around which capital can often constrain our own imaginations of how we should participate, what we can bring, etc. In particular, I'm concerned about this argument sometimes of we just need people to give money and then get out of the way, which could outsource not only the political labor for us to advance things, but the political risk. And in this story, Adam, what I'm hearing is a choice to recognize that in giving this money away, there would be political labor and even political risk involved, and almost a mathematical equation of like, how might it fall, and how can I, based on that, what can my role be? Which I appreciate, and I hope everyone kind of finds themselves allowing themselves to ask around political labor and political risk. Oftentimes we use the example of the Montgomery bus boycott and the role of the drivers who were able to help maintain a bus boycott for over a year by choosing to use their privilege and their vehicles, not just give money, but to actually transport people. And so that kind of recognition about role and possibility. I now want to move to, this is a story about the two of you as well, and the Beat and the Foundation. Clearly, you all are not on good terms by virtue of you all sharing a window, a Zoom window, which might in this day and age be one of the most intimate public statements you can make, and which is powerful. So I'd love, Lisa, to kind of ask you, what is the relationship between the Beat and the Foundation today? What is the relationship between you, Lisa, and Adam? And then if you could, just imagine for a moment, what if the Foundation had, instead of divesting itself, chosen to give the Beat, let's say, pretty sizable grant, $100,000 each year. What would the relationship between you and Adam and the Beat and the Foundation be? How might it be different than what it is today?
Let's see. My relationship with Adam, I think, is we have more of a relationship now. I think that, I knew Adam from around Baltimore. It's a very small city. And when you talk about people in the arts community, it gets even smaller. He had been very helpful to us in the way that the first version of the Beat had ended. Like many people, I also did not know that he had access to. But I think that now, going through this process, I feel like he's somebody that I can, he has his own nonprofit. So like I can ask him for advice or tell him things that are going on, and we have those conversations. We also have had to have hard conversations. And I feel like that's a thing that we can continue in a way that, like, a lot of white people, I don't even feel like that's on the table to have conversations. Like, my arts and culture editor is from Terry is from Texas. And she's like, Lisa, the white people in Baltimore are different because, like, she's like, in Texas, where you stand. Baltimore, I think, is a little, or the mid-Atlantic region, a little bit different because they've told them, the white people here have told themselves, like, we're not Southern, we're not that. So like, it's a lot more of a murky conversation, and it gets even murkier when you talk about a majority Black city like Baltimore. So I feel like, I don't think that me and Adam are always going to have this magical, perfect relationship, but I do feel like this kind of primes us to be able to really confront some things as we kind of work together through whatever this develops into. I feel like there was something else that you asked me.
What happens if the Foundation did the worst thing?
Oh,
Maybe.
I mean, although I was surprised that I got the money from Adam, I always knew that the Beat was going to exist. Like, when I got the news, I was working at, like I said, a different nonprofit, but I even told them, like, I'm always going to leave and go to the Beat. I came to them because they had lost leadership. So I came to them as an interim editor-in-chief. They hired an editor-in-chief and kept me on as a managing editor. And that's, I think, part of the reason why is because I always was like, this is not ever going to be my main thing. Like, I always knew that the Beat was really important and that it was kind of like my life's work.
I mean, Lisa, you're my buddy now. We get to see each other out. Lisa's partner is the singer in my band. You know, and so on a personal and professional level, I feel really intertwined in a good way. You know, I feel, as you were saying, like if I'm engaged in a certain act, I know that it's part of my responsibility to take on a certain amount of risk, whether that means political, financial, or otherwise. And certainly, you know, those are decisions I have with my own spouse and things that I feel strongly about. But one of the reasons, like Lisa was saying, that like we're still so engaged is, you know, I'm a small business attorney who helps nonprofits and help creative businesses all the time. So I have a relevant skill set. I live in Baltimore City. You know, we don't live too far from each other. You know, my family, the Holofceners got to Baltimore, poor Russian Jews in the late 19th century. So I feel, you know, I feel of the place, and I feel like I'm trying to commit acts that are responsive to the holistic, you know, again, intergenerational approach that I've been a part of. And so I just feel really fortunate that I'm not on the board, you know, of the Beat. I'm not a contractor. I don't make any money. But it still feels very natural for Lisa to want to call me up, right? I mean, just speaking to what you said, Mario, I don't know what I personally would have done if my family, and even there were talks, of course, my family is like, well, why don't we give them less money? And we can always give them more later. And of course I was like, no, absolutely not. But if that was what they had figured out, they're like, all right, Adam, we're not doing the like $1 million, no questions asked. We are going to do $100,000 a year. I don't even know if I personally would have been, Lisa, like, she was going to get to figure out whether she would have accepted that deal, been a part of it, whether I could not have been a part of that deal, because I knew what the implications would have been. And I knew what connection that would have created. And I couldn't have done it. There's no way, because I could not have put myself, and I'm the only, you know, Holofcener who lives in Baltimore City anymore, or really in the state of Maryland anyway. So I could not have put myself in a position to have that power dynamic. I would have, yeah, it would have been public disowning of the Holofcener name for me. It would have been a zero possibility.
Yeah, really appreciate that. I started off in community organizing, then I found my way into philanthropy for familial reasons. And someone kind of warned me. They're like, hey, philanthropy is going to be really tough. You received your last honest compliment. And coming from community organizing, I was like, you get compliments? I was like, how vain are these people that they need honest compliments? But over time, that communication with you and that uncertainty of whether that communication was with you or with the capital you might have access to was hard and distorted ability to have relationships, hold relationships, etc. And so in our prep call, one of the things I appreciated, Lisa, was the way you express the ability to have conversations about the Beat with both of you being able to have full freedom of who you are and your thoughts without the necessity to think about capital into those conversations, because capital certainly distorts conversations.
Well, and Mary, I was just going to add, in terms of the risk, you know, Lisa and I were just talking about, I mean, one of the things I've experienced a lot, especially since the AP story, but even before that, is I have a lot of people reach out to me now all the time being like, great work on the thing. And a lot of these are, you know, high net worth individuals or people who have proximity to capital. And one of the things that I didn't realize so much, but I think it's really important, is people engage with me in that way. And then my first response is always like, well, if you think it's great, I think it's like a necessary condition to trying to reach a more equitable world. What are you doing? I'm happy to consult. I'm happy to give my labor. I've gone through this experience, and I've really had like no one, make change their behavior, even after those things, and then having to walk through the world. Where like these are saying, I run a nonprofit too, right? And I have to deal with fundraising, and I have to deal with funders who did not, during the pandemic or otherwise, open up their coffers in any way substantially, right? Change any power dynamics. No one in Baltimore, I mean, we live in one of the most regressive philanthropic circles in Baltimore City. And I have to walk through the world every day, being in contact with these people who are either asking, trying to talk to me about what happened with the beat without having any interest in changing their own behavior or influencing others, as well as interacting with my own foundations. And I've, I have that as a call to be like, we're literally on this call right now, sort of re-engaging with this story again. And I really hope that it turns into something made manifest for the beat, but also for the people on the call to really see, if you are engaging with other people who are trying to move in a different way, understanding then there's like necessarily adversarial conflict that they might not feel, but I then feel more of, to be in community with people who sort of actively choose to not move differently after we're trying to put forth a different example. And that's been an intense thing to engage with.
Yeah.
And I still need money.
Yeah.
Like the $1 million is great, and it gives me a foundation, but like I'm not done at all. Like it really just puts me on the playing field. It does not mean like it's a kickback and like just think about like high-minded ideas about journalism.
Which is a great segue to the next question for both of you. And as we wrap up, invite people to share questions, appreciations in the chat. This act of sharing your personal and collective stories are a way to invite people into your own stories, and at the same time to provide the person hearing them, all of you on this webinar today, an invitation if that's what's needed, permission if that's what you're seeking, or a challenge if that's what motivates you to create new stories for yourselves and hopefully the world. Lisa, I want to invite you to invite this audience into the story of the Baltimore Beat, invite them into how to be in relationship with you. And I like how Adam framed it in our prep call, an intervention already chosen by community. And Denise, I appreciate your comment in the chat, an invitation to your team and yourself, including your sustainability, that is what breathes life into the beat every day.
Sure. I'm gonna try. I'm not sure how to answer this. I think that one way I'm gonna start talking a little bit about community. One of the pictures that I have in my phone is a picture that someone sent me, and it's a copy of the beat, and it's on this bar, and there's like watermarks from someone else's drink, and there's like another drink. And I think the thing that I'm most proud about, the thing that maybe want to save that picture, and the thing that I'm so proud of is that the Baltimore Beat is a place where people take the journalism into their real lives with them. We launched it in this time where people were really saying that print was dead, and we're even like, there's a lot of grant money that goes to transitioning print papers into online. And I'm not foolish enough to believe that online is not like a major thing, but I think in a poor city like Baltimore, and really a very literary city like Baltimore, print matters. I put out a paper that in the middle of it has a resource guide where you can get rent assistance, you can get free groceries, you can get help even getting online access. I have a community calendar. I have an arts and culture calendar. I am publishing young people right now. In the issue that's out right now, there's a college student that wrote one of our stories. So there's so many ways that it's already just like such a natural part of Baltimore's community. And also so many things that I think are natural funding sources for folks that want to help support it, that I think that it should be like a no-brainer to sustain us with the money that Adam's family has given us.
Yeah, and I appreciate you saying that at the beginning, you didn't know exactly how to answer this, in part because I don't want to put the burden on the folks doing the work to have to figure out how to invite people. Mutuality in this world, now more than ever, is a muscle that I feel like has atrophied. I don't know the word, but a muscle that we all need to begin to kind of exercise. And certainly with the theme of this conference, Lenfest, I do worry about any role that I might have in sharing your story for consumption or voyeurism. So on behalf of you two, I definitely want to make a pitch to whoever hears this, whether live today or in the future, to take a moment and just simply consider if I found value in this conversation, if I found value in what Lisa has brought into this world, what Adam has brought into this world, what might mutuality at the scale and capacity I have, which could simply be sharing the AP story, look like. And in fact, I'm going to take it, I've never done this before, but I'm going to take an awkward 30-second pause to invite the audience to consider what mutuality after receiving this gift of this story is. Thank you all. And certainly if any audience members came up with something in that time, feel free to share it with those of us here today in the chat. Adam and Lisa, want to give you an opportunity to share kind of final comments as we approach the 12:30 mark. And maybe Adam, will start with you and Lisa provide you the final word.
We're just reviewing the chat here. See if there's anything to say. And I just saw something in the Q&A. I guess briefly just responding in the chat, like, it's easy to, like, I just think foundations should divest. I don't think people associated with foundations have the subject matter or ethical grounding to be doing anything that they're doing. In the same way that I just feel fortunate that the skill sets I have and the personal relationships I've built keep me in community with Lisa after the money's gone, right? There's no more, as Mario was putting it, sort of like false compliments to be given, because it's all about power dynamics and inequitable systems and structures. And so, you know, I agree that shit, it's hard to do anything, and there's lots of barriers for lots of folks. But I look at foundations especially as being fairly low hanging fruit. You know, if you're interested in trying to figure out how your own liquid assets can be distributed, looking to a group like Resource Generation, or other folks who really try to look at wealth redistribution, which is what I, you know, is what I was looking at, what we were trying to participate in. Those are some good resources to go after, but family foundations, making the pitch to divest should be the easy part. The hard part is, and even someone in the chat in the Q&A said, well, how do, you know, why is journalism important? I think, as you said, Mario, I think what's important is anything the community deems important, and the vitality and the bona fides that Lisa and the Baltimore Beat had accrued with little to no backing is what made it try and limit the gesture and control of the Holofcener Foundation making that decision, right? Becoming that kingmaker or that rainmaker or whatever it was. And so, well, I believe we should, you know, have, there's a community pay, there's a Baltimore Beat that should exist in every community. in the world. It's also, if you're a part of a foundation, anything that your community has stamped on as being important that has not been capitalized, that's what should be funded.
And I guess for me, I will address, I saw a comment from Denise Barnes. I also saw a comment about from Tracy Powell. So I wanted to talk a little bit about that. Like I said, I know that I don't get to sit down and wait. The money that we generated so far is money that we have not actively had to go out and seek. So the next part of the money that Adam's family invested in is folks that can literally just be going out for money. So that's always going to be a part of my business model. We also make sure that we are accessible to people that want to give us smaller donations. People can donate at any time. We make it very easy. We're through NewsPath. I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with that, but it's a thing that a lot of journalism places are using. It makes it easier on our end and easy on the user's end. And so we can always give a one-time donation, or you can have recurring donations. So I think through having dedicated resources to seeking out funds, through making it very easy for smaller donations to come in the door, and like I said, building out things that can be funded, whether it be our community calendar, our resource guide, the fact that the Beat is a teaching paper for young Black journalists. I think that those are all entryways to funding and keeping this going.
Awesome. Thank you. Just to close this out, I did want to come back to Alexander Bell and their counter-narrative series. I think immoral ways of organizing resources within societies not only require enforcement and policing, but often cultural cover through narratives, whether that be the myth of meritocracy, whether stories of othering, stories of philanthropy or the rebranding of philanthropy as a love of humanity rather than the inequitable distribution of resources. And we know philanthropy is built and maintained and then nourished on the continuation, recreation, and adaptation of false narratives and stories that pull others into its own story, and even pull in people who understand the morality of such inequity in our society. And so I hope we all get to appreciate this story as a counter narrative to what's possible, and the rewards that can come out of it, right? That ability for the Baltimore Beat to focus on community rather than capital. And we also know that while certainly this story is not, it's just a tiny story of the Baltimore Beat, the existence, the continuation, the growth of the Baltimore Beat will carry this story forward, this counter-narrative story forward. And so I do, again, want to invite this community of folks who are listening to this to ensure that both that story continues as well as that of the Baltimore Beat and all the stories that will come out of the Baltimore Beat as a newspaper. And with that, just my appreciation, Lisa and Adam, for allowing me to be here today. And certainly thank you, Ali, who I always just enjoy any opportunity to work with.
Thank you, Mario. Always great to work with you too. And thank you, Adam and Lisa, for your time today and your honesty and candor. So happy we were able to be a part of this conversation and to host this. So for everyone else, we're gonna wrap up. We're gonna share out this recording and resources after the summit for those who weren't able to join us live. We really encourage you to continue conversations with each other throughout the summit. In the main Zoom room, there's some pretty great ways to connect with each other. And we will be back in 30 minutes at 4 p.m. Eastern for the next few sessions. So thanks, everyone.